So this will be a walkthrough of the final section of the practice problems that I gave you for exam 2, which is Friday. So premise 1 says, if Charlie loves the little redheaded girl, then he misses his chance with Peppermint Patty. We're going to start by labeling the propositions in each of these premises. So we'll take Charlie loves the little redheaded girl, which is a proposition. Remember, a proposition is the kind of thing that can be true or false. Charlie loves the little redheaded girl can be true or false, so it's going to be it's a proposition. It's going to get its own letter, and I'm just going to call it R. Remember, the choice of letters here is arbitrary. You can pick any letter you want. I'm just picking R to help me remember because we have redheaded. Now I look through and I notice that down here in number 5, Charlie loves the little redheaded girl occurs again, so I need to make sure I assign it the same letter. Now I'll come back up here. He misses his chance with Peppermint Patty. I'm going to assign that P. And I look through and I see he gets his chance with Peppermint Patty here. That's the opposite of missing his chance, so I'll assign that not P. Now over here I have Charlie won't be happy. I'll assign that not H. Come down here, Charlie won't be happy occurs again. I assign that not H. Over here I have he won't laugh much. That's a new letter. I'm going to assign that not L. Right here I have Charlie will laugh a lot. That's the opposite of won't laugh much, so I'm going to assign that L. He'll lose his friendship with Linus. I'm going to assign that F, and then down here that occurs again. So that's the first stage of solving these problems, is assigning each proposition a letter. The second stage is representing the reasoning. There's a few different ways you can proceed. I'll show you 2 correct ways to proceed. So one correct way to proceed is by now symbolizing all of the premises. So I'm going to start with premise 1. It's if R, then P, so that's what I write, R arrow P, because remember the arrow is if then. Premise 2, not H unless not P. One way to represent unless is as or, so I wrote it not H or not P. Then we have 3, Charlie won't be happy, then he won't laugh much. It's if not H, then not L, so I write that, if not H, then not L. Now we have L or F, so I write that, L or F. Now we just have R by itself. And then finally, 6 is going to be F, and that's a conclusion, and I know we're going to have to do some work to get to the conclusion, so I'm leaving some space. All right, so that's the second step, is to symbolize the argument. Now you need to show that you see that the conclusion, in this case F, follows from these premises, 1 through 5. So how do you do that? Well, you start by picking the simplest thing over here. In this case, the simplest thing is R. Simplest just means the syntax is the shortest. It has the fewest occurrences of words like or, if then, and so on. So now we take R and we look over here and we see, can I do anything with these other ones? So L and L or F. Well, telling me R and telling me L or F doesn't tell me anything. I can't infer anything interesting. Same thing here, I can't infer anything interesting. But if I look up, I see that if I know R, then I can get to P. So I know R, and I know R gives me P, which means I can conclude P. And that's a conclusion. And where did I get it? I got it from R, then P, and R. So I got it from 1 and 5. And now I'm going to put slashes through 1 and 5 to help me remember I've used those to get to P. Now I just do the same procedure. I look at the remaining claims, 2, 3, 4, and little a here, and I ask, which one's simplest? In this case, P is simplest. So I look up here and I see, what can P allow me to conclude? Well, L or F combined with P doesn't help me. Not H, then not L combined with P doesn't help me. But not H or not P combined with P does, because P tells me P is true. And this one here, number 2, says either H is false or P is false. Well, since I know P is true, I know it's not the case that P is false, which means since one of these must be right, it must be this one which is right. That is, not H must be right. So H must be false, and I draw that conclusion from little a here and number 2. So I can cross those out. These here stand for the rules. This is modus ponens. This is disjunctive syllogism. I mentioned in class that you don't need to write the rules if you don't want to, but writing them helps you make sure you're staying on track. Okay, so now we do the same thing again. Not H is the simplest thing remaining from 3, 4, and B. I look up here, I see that not H takes me to not L, so I draw a conclusion not L, and I got that from little b and 3. Now, these are the only 2 things left, 4 and C. So what does my not L tell me? Well, I know either L is true or F is true, but I've learned that L is false, which means F must be true. so I get to F here. And that's a conclusion from 4 and C by disjunctive syllogism, so I cross those out. I've used everything. I've proved my conclusion. Okay, let's move on to the next problem. So I go through and I do the same thing. I find all my propositions, and then I give them letters. I'm going to give D will be happy D, she'll be mean to Roger R, and so on. The key thing is that I always give the same proposition the same letters. So D will be happy here gets D. That means D will be D will be unhappy gets D here. That means D will be unhappy also gets D here. Okay, now this time I'm going to proceed in a slightly different way. Instead of just symbolizing 1 through 5 and then seeing what I can do with them, I'm going to start out by trying to figure out what I can do. So I look over here and I look for the simplest thing. Well, here I have an if-then. Here I have something that's super complex. It says if-then one or the other. Here I have another if-then. Well, here I have 2 claims that are comparatively simple. So I can pick either one and start with it. I'm going to pick number 5, their mom gets mad. And I look up at the other ones and I think, okay, if I know their mom gets mad, what else do I know? Well, this one here, number 2, says if M is true, then either P or D must be true. So I'll write that down. If M is true, then either P or D is true. And now I know M is true. I know if M is true, then either P or D is true. So I know either P or D is true. And that's a conclusion from 2 and 5. Okay? Now, I know P or D, but that's a complex thing. I don't want to use that right away because it's complex. So I'm going to look back over here and try and find what else is simple. And remember, not B is simple. So I'm just going to write that down. And then I'm going to look through and see, okay, if I know that B is false, is there anything I can infer? Well, there's a B here, so let's look at that one. Their mom will punish Roger only if she's had a bad day gets symbolized P arrow B. And if I know that B is false, and I know P guarantees B, since P guarantees B but B isn't right, P can't be right either. So I can conclude that P is false. Okay. Now, one thing I want you to notice is I'm not doing the slashing out. I haven't slashed these out, and it makes my job harder. Mentally, it makes it harder because now I have not P. If I'd been doing a good job of slashing things out, then I could say, okay, I don't need to look at certain ones of these. But since I haven't, and I don't remember what I used, I kind of need to be like, I need to look through all of them. So I'll look through all of them and see what P can tell me. What not P can tell me. Well, it doesn't really help here. I could use 2, but there's something simpler I can do. I've already used 2 anyway, right? I used 2 to get to A. So let's combine not P with P or D. If I know that P is false, and I know that either P is false or D is true, then I know D must be true. And that's a conclusion from B here and A. And now I know D, and I look through my claims and I see, okay, D is going to take me to R. So, oops, I skipped a step here. I would lose points on the test for that. So I'm going to add in that step that I skipped. The step is to write number 1 over here and to say it says that D gives me R. That's a premise. Okay, so coming back, I've got D here, and I've got D gives me R, so I can conclude R, and that's a conclusion from number 1 and C by modus ponens. And had I been crossing things out, I would have seen I used all these right. I used 5 and 2 to get to A. I used A and 4, and sorry, I used then 4 and 5 to get to B. I then used A and B to get to C, and then used C and 1 to get to 6. All right, let's look at the next one. So I'm going to give letters here. Martin is right. Most clergy are wrong. Martin needs to think more carefully. Martin is acting like he usually does. Martin doesn't need to think more carefully. Martin is lying. Martin hasn't lost his mind. He's not lying. Martin is acting like he usually does. Martin hasn't lost his mind occurs again. Martin is right. And most clergy are wrong. So I've assigned my letters, and now I'm going to go through and do a representation of the argument. So premise 1 says, if R, then W unless C. And remember, one way to do unless is as or. So I'd say R, then W or C. 2 says, if U, then not C or L. So I have not C or L. If U, then not C or L. 3 says, if not M, then not L, which I have here. 4 says U, 5 says not M, 6 says R, and then my conclusion, what I'm ultimately trying to get to is 7, which is W. And now I'm just going to try and get there. So I could start with either one of these simple ones. I'm going to start with 5, which says not M, and 3, which says if not M, then L, not L. So not M gives me not L, so I conclude not L from 3 and 5. Now I'm going to say, well, I know not L, and I know I'm violating the rule here of going with only simple ones. I should have used 6 next, but I saw this, so I decided to do it. Not L lets me cross out this L, right? Because this says if U is true, then either C is false or L is true. But I know L isn't true, so I can cross out that L and get if U is true, then C is false. And that's what we do right here. And I just used 2 and A to get there, so I cross those out. I now have U, then not C. Well, over here I have U, right? So I can combine U with U gives me not C and get not C, and that's a conclusion from B and 4. And now I have not C. What can I do with that? Well, R is going to give me W or C, but I know it's not going to give me C, which means R must give me W. So I can conclude R and W from 1 and C. And now I have R then W, and I have R right here, which means W must be right. And I got that from R then W and R, so I cross those out, and that's the conclusion. Okay, if you're having trouble with this kind of problem, I suggest going through this video again. There's also other practice problems with answers on Canvas. I suggest giving those a try. Okay, I'll stop the video there.